Okay, so we are good to go. Welcome everyone and happy World Water Day. I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me for one moment before we get started on our introductions. So Stevie, can you confirm that you can see just the screen, you don't see the presenter view?
Yes, I can confirm.
Excellent. So I will leave you to the waiting room and we will get started.
Great.
Or did you want to start? I think that's actually.
I can start and monitor. Hi, okay. Everybody. Welcome to our second annual community presentation for World Water Day with the Twin Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. We're super grateful for our turnout and for everyone that has shown up today to talk about water in Sault Ste. Marie. And before we begin, my name is Stevie Lutzi. Sorry, I'm one of the co-hosts with Emily tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Emily to do our land acknowledgement to start us off.
Thanks, Stevie, and welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Emily Cormier, and I work for the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Before we begin, we wish to start the evening off in a good way. So on behalf of the WaterWise Network, though we are gathered virtually, we acknowledge with respect that we are on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people known as Wawating. In particular, the Anishinaabe of Sioux Tribe of Chippewa Indians, Kinuzukay-Kaing, also known as Bay Mills Indian Community. We also acknowledge that many of us joining today's event are from Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, home of the Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and Métis Nation. We acknowledge these peoples are the traditional custodians of the land, water, and all species. We pay respects to their ancestors and to them as original and current land protectors. Miigwech. So before we dive in here, I'd like to just do a bit more of a formal introduction to myself and my co-host Stevie this evening. My name is Emily Cormier, and I am the Sustainability Coordinator at the City of Sault Ste. Marie. I am from Sault Ste. Marie, and I've lived away for many years. I've been back for about 2 years now, and I'm absolutely thrilled. Like many of our residents and visitors to Sault Ste. Marie, I grew up on the water. I'm a big fan of Lake Superior, an avid paddler. I have a background in natural resources and energy planning, and I feel very privileged that my day job is something that I'm passionate about, but I also really like to do. And I'm just thrilled this evening to be one of your hosts for this very important acknowledgement of World Water Day. Over to you, Stevie.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Stevie Lutzi. I am also from Sault Ste. Marie. I grew up on the shores of Lake Superior. We had a camp in Pointe-aux-Chenes. The water has always been such a healing and wonderful spot for me during my life, being at camp, and it's just the feelings of being in nature. Sault Ste. Marie is really wonderful for that. It's a beautiful place to grow up. Currently, I work for the David Suzuki Foundation. I'm working on the Future Grand Prize as the project coordinator, which is for youth initiatives between 5 and 24. We are, sorry, I'm admitting somebody in. We are encouraging green initiatives in communities. So that I was hoping to be able to do a little plug to get maybe a Sault Ste. Marie grassroots initiative with the youth on the event. I am currently in Ottawa, but I've lived in Toronto for 10 years. I am moving back. I just applied for a master's in forest conservation with University of Toronto, so fingers crossed. And I'm really grateful to be here. This is my second time hosting the World Water Day presentation, and I'm just really delighted for everybody that's taken the time to come and our wonderful panelists. So thank you.
Thanks, Stevie. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here today. Today, as you know, is World Water Day. Since 1992, the United Nations has designated March 22nd every year around the globe as World Water Day, which focuses on the importance of water and raises awareness to inspire action around the global water crisis. Every year there is a theme, and this year's theme is groundwater, making the invisible visible. Almost all liquid fresh water in the world is groundwater, supporting drinking water supplies, sanitation systems, farming, industry, ecosystems, and this will play a critical role in adapting to climate change. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, we are extremely privileged. We're located at the nexus of Lake Superior and Lake Huron, connected by the St. Mary's River, and we share international waterways. The Great Lakes combined comprise nearly 20% of the world's fresh water. 20%. Take a minute and think about that figure. And only 0.3% is accessible to all humankind. Again, I cannot stress it enough how lucky we are to live in this part of the world. And for those joining from away, I encourage you to visit Sault Ste. Marie if you haven't already done so. World Water Day provides us with an opportunity to make a difference in our community. We invite all of those listening at home and our panelists as well to acknowledge and respect the importance of protecting the freshwater for today and generations to come. Over to you, Stevie.
Thanks, Emily. So tonight's agenda, we have 4 wonderful speakers that are going to each have their own individual talks. We're going to be starting with Elizabeth, Rebecca, Kevin, and then John. So let's get started.
Excellent. Just to add to that, we will, after each speaker, have a short Q&A session. If there's any questions, we invite you all to put those into the chat or raise your hand afterwards and we will unmute you. We also will have some closing remarks and more Q&A at the end of this evening's presentation. Without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this evening. Welcome, Elizabeth Edgar-Webkamigad. Elizabeth is from Wikwemikong on Manitoulin Island, and she currently resides in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Liz has completed her BA in Anishinaabe-Moan at Algoma University and her B.Ed at Queen's University. She is currently working on her grad level work while working full-time and supporting her family. Liz started her post-secondary work a number of years ago, attending Mount Royal College in Calgary, Alberta, and graduating from the Social Service Worker Program in 1990. Liz has been a youth and children's trainer, a family and community development specialist, serving Canada and the United States for over 30 years. And in the past 35 years, Liz has been featured regionally and nationally as a conference and motivational speaker, using storytelling, humor, and wit, combined with audience participation. She currently works as the Director of Health and Human Services at Aquatic First Nation. I could go on. We are just so thrilled to have you here, Liz, and I will pass it over to you. Thank you so much for your time.
So I'm going to unmute myself. There we go, so that I can talk. I recognize a few faces, one in particular that I wish to acknowledge. You're looking right at me, Marianne. I have not seen you in years, and how wonderful it is to see you. Certainly to the rest of you, welcome to your your interest, your love, your celebration of a day that has been put aside, as we heard, for many years now by the UN, but certainly has been something that has been very significant and important to Anishinaabe people right across Turtle Island and other parts of the world, Indigenous people right around the globe, really and truly the importance of understanding a day like today. In our language, we would call it Mino Nabish Gijagat, a beautiful, water day that many of us have become informed about, and wish to stand up for the water. I acknowledge my English name is Elizabeth, but I also wish to share with you my Anishinaabe Noswin is Nanoshkos, an Ojibwe name in English that translates to hummingbird. And I feel very fortunate and blessed to, of course, be asked to speak here, but in the last little while have been having a number of people reach out to me to ask to assist and to share some teachings. And I really want to acknowledge that my role here in Bawatting or Sault Ste. Marie area for the last 26 years I have been living in this region is really and truly being known as an educator, whether it's through storytelling and or getting right into the school system, which is how I met Marianne years ago, to working at the university in the last while, to where I am currently as the Director of Health and Human Services for Batchewana First Nation. Education has always been something that kind of seeps into my everyday. So I'm really thankful to be in a position as an auntie, as a mom, certainly as a grandma. I am a new grandma. My youngest granddaughter will be a year in a week old, you know, March 29th, she'll be a year old. And then my oldest granddaughter is a year and a half. She's a couple months older than her little counterpart. And I will tell you, being a grandma is one of the best roles I have ever experienced in all the roles. And what is significant about that, really and truly, is the role that I play and or have as a woman in our Anishinaabe worldview perspective as a keeper of the water. And so I do wish to acknowledge two fellow community members from the community that I come from, Wikwemikong unceded Indian Territory, Josephine Mandaman, who is a relative of mine, who started her walk around the Great Lakes region and her walk around other parts of water on Turtle Island years ago, and then passed the torch to a young relative of hers, who is the current Chief Water Commissioner, Autumn Pelche. And the beauty that we have as women, when we look at our Anishinaabe worldview teachings, in the responsibility of caring for the water. So as a grandma, as a mom, as an auntie, as a big female cousin, a big sister, a daughter, and all the other roles that I have as a woman, I really do give acknowledgement to this good life that we have, the teachings that I feel very blessed and fortunate to have received from my parents, in spite of the different traumatic background that my family comes from, was exposed to, as many of our Indigenous families right across the land may have experienced. I give thanks that both my parents decided that it was so important for this beautiful way of life to be sure that it was passed down to the next generation, and that, 3 generations out now of residential school, that beautiful life is being passed down. I can share with you, and this will be the first time I'm sharing it actually. I'm a pretty big social media, woo, good things happened today. And I didn't put this on social media yet because I actually was waiting for this evening. In our culture, we have the beauty of understanding smudge. And for us, access to our medicines, and in particular here around the Great Lakes region, we have beautiful access to medicine, abundance of medicine. Our Gishgondik, our cedar, we have sema, tobacco, we have wingush, sweetgrass, and we also have sage. Anyway, in my home, one of the responsibilities I have as a woman, as a grandma, an auntie, mom in our home, is to teach about the use of medicines, along with understanding our role as women around the responsibility we have as life givers, life bearers, the keeper of that water that brings our babies into the world. Anyway, my granddaughter, Oakley, the one that is a year and a half, I feel so fortunate. She lives with us right now with my daughter and her dad. And anyway, every night or every second night, I have the joy of giving her a bath. So we go swim. That's what we call it. And we have playtime in the tub. We sing and we do all the things that grandparents do. When we're done with swim, we stand up, we look in the mirror for pretty girl, and then we clean our ears, and then we look down to our smudge bowl. So I have one like this in my bathroom, and there's sage in it. And then I light it and I tell Oakley, okay, let's smudge. And we show her, the whole teaching around that, embracing that medicine. Well, I will share for the first time here that my granddaughter smudged all by herself without me even saying anything. was doing what she had been taught to do. And for me, you know, when I think about our responsibility today, and I think about our responsibility for the generations to come, which really and truly is the message I wish to share with you all here, is that we are all definitely connected to each other. You know, a lot of times we think about, we hear about 6 degrees of separation. Sometimes in my community, we hear about four degrees of separation. But really and truly for us as Anishinaabe people, we really believe about that connection to all. And that connection is to our natural world, that connection is to our water, that connection is to all living beings. So I really love, you know, the acknowledgement this year for that invisible life form, maybe that not all of us, you know, are consciously aware of, but it exists. I wish to share with you during my conversation with you a beautiful teaching about the one dish with one spoon. Now this treaty, this Peace and Friendship Treaty actually goes along very well with this beautiful Peace and Friendship Treaty known as the Two-Row Wampum. But for this evening, I'm going to share with you a teaching that I hold near and dear to my heart. It's one that I, you know, look to ensure the next generation in my family has, not only my children, but my grandchildren, in terms of the importance of knowing about responsibility to and with each other. And so when we think about our water and we think about, you know, the beautiful facts of the Great Lakes and the power that they hold in terms of life, you know, the life giving that they give, what a beautiful thought to have when we think about responsibility and we think about reciprocity, you know, giving and taking, giving and receiving, and how important that is. And so the teaching that I share with you this evening, one that I feel is so really important for us to pass along to our neighbor, anybody that's here this evening, you know, the conversation that's going to happen following my intro, you're going to listen to a panel of, you know, very respected people in the field sharing some information. Take with you, you know, what is important and go back and share that wherever you happen to be. I also ask that when it's time for your question and answer, for you to put back into this dialogue this evening, if you have information to share or you have a perspective that is enlightening and, you know, we could take home with us, please do that. And that's what this teaching around the one dish with one spoon is all about. Actually knowing that creation has given all of us everything that we need to live what we call the good life, Minoba Madzuan, and that how we understand that depicted in this Peace and Friendship Treaty would be that in these purple wampum beads here, they symbolize creation giving everything in a region, in a territory, in a place, all that is needed to have a good life. And the one spoon symbolized by the white beads in the middle, that the spoon is there for people to use to take what they need to live that good life and to put that spoon back, being cognizant of your neighbor, being cognizant of the people here on, you know, on the screen that I can see, being cognizant of the people that I work with, that I'm not going to just take for me, but I'm also going to think about what I'm going to leave for the people that have yet to come or the ones coming, you know, after me to also take. And I wish to acknowledge a teaching that I was part of a circle there a few years back, and there was a grandpa talking, and he shared about, you know, the two-row wampum, and there's beautiful teachings in this belt as well, this Peace and Friendship belt. But there's, as he was talking about the one dish with one spoon, what he was talking about was the beauty of not only am I taking with that one spoon from that one dish symbolically, but I would also use that spoon to take something that I might have and put it back. So that I could refill or restock that bowl. And I never forgot when he shared that with us that day. Really made lots of sense for me. It hit home, helped me understand, you know, the importance of that reciprocity, that give and take, giving and receiving, and that I need to be mindful. There is a whole system around me that, you know, we need to rely on each other. We need to take care of each other, whether that's the natural world, the water world, or our human world. And certainly we are seeing all kinds of that right now, right around the globe, in other aspects other than water. But I do wish to acknowledge, you know, all of the elders and knowledge keepers who have shared with me throughout my young life, and subsequently my older life, where I'm at now. And I really do give thanks for that Kindoswin, that knowledge, the learning that has been passed down to me through the generations. I certainly acknowledge the season that we are in right now, although I haven't been outside yet since I've been at work. I was waiting for our panel to start, and I was going to do it here at work. I hear we have some weather coming this way here in Sault Ste. Marie, but regardless of, you know, the day, the weather that is here today, we are actually in the start of a beautiful season. And I wish to acknowledge our maple sap, that first water that flows after the winter season, and the amount of beautiful teachings that are attached to this time that we are currently in. That maple sap, that maple water has so many healing properties built right in, and many beautiful teachings for us all around this time of year as we get ready for that new growing season. So I share with you those thoughts. You know, when you get asked to talk about some teachings, and then, you know, the good old thought notion of time gets put to it, it's like, what do I say and how do I narrow it down? And you know what, I just pray and hope that what I need to say comes to my voice as I share. So I certainly say Chumigwech for the opportunity to share a couple of teachings around Nabish. Water is so sacred. It is life indeed. We come from it, and life would not happen without it. I do thank you for allowing me a few minutes of your time. Chumigwech.
Miigwech, Liz, thank you so very much for sharing your knowledge. I find it, I think I can speak for everyone. It was very inspiring and a beautiful way to open this very important conversation and evening. And so again, I offer you on behalf of Stevie and myself, Waterwise team, and the other participants, thank you very, very much. You know, your comments about reciprocity of the teachings you've shared, really, they remind me a lot of my work in sustainability, and, you know, trying to do what we can now to leave enough for future generations. And I feel you've just expressed that more eloquently than I ever could have. And I will be taking your teachings with me as I go. We do have time after each panelist for a short question and answer period. There will be more at the end, but I'd like to open it up. Please feel free to put your questions into the chat, and we will answer them accordingly.
What is Liz's full name?
My full name, so in English, is Elizabeth Edgar-Webkamigad. And Webkamigad is a name traditional to Wikwemikong. It actually, in the rough translation, our language is a beautiful and complicated story that it tells, right? It's not just one thing, it's actually a whole description. And it talks about where the land starts. So if you can imagine, there's many different scenarios that Webkamigad could, in our language, could describe. Edgar is my dad's name, and my dad came from Scugog First Nation, which is a little bit south. And so that's my English name. My Anishinaabe Noswin, as I said, is Nanothkos, which is hummingbird.
I love that.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you for sharing.
Hmm?
I'd love to connect.
Well, I will put my email here. I'll actually put my Liz@gmail email here, even though I said I was here at work. My personal email, if anybody at all is interested in more information, if I could help you, point you in the direction of something, a resource, I'd be more than happy to do so. There are definitely a lot of people in our region, in our area, knowledge keepers that are willing to share. And so I can certainly, direct you, connect you, and even share myself.
Thank you, Auntie Liz.
Awesome, you're welcome.
I just quickly would like to say something. Thank you so much for your beautiful share tonight. And you called out Mariana Matteo, and she's actually my mom. And so something about what you say and how like passing down your teachings and the importance of family, and like how I grew up around water and the environment, and how important it is to love and respect what we are given. I just wanted to share that, just that little, like you sharing that is just an example of like my mom getting me into the work that I'm doing now. So just thank you for that, and really grateful to be here.
Thanks, Stevie. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Liz, for putting your email into the chat there. Much appreciated. Well, I don't see any, and we have some more panelists and some more stories to tell. So again, Liz, on behalf of the WaterWise Network, thank you so much. Oh, looks like we have a question from Elaine. She's saying she can't unmute.
You should be able to, Elaine. Try now.
There we go. Before it said that the host has to allow me.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry, I have to hold this up because the camera's at a really awkward angle. Liz. And also, I want to acknowledge your contributions, and a few people here actually to our local Canada Water Agency discussions. The conversation we had with multiple folks has actually been carried forward and instigated and catalyzed a lot of other interesting discussions, both in the classroom and also in the community. So that's been amazing. I just want you to know that it's actually been carried forward and it's going places. So, cool. But on that note, I do want to ask you, because I know storytelling is a big part of what we've talked about between us, and also just I've heard you speak elsewhere about storytelling and the importance of that. So I'm just wondering what you see as the role of storytelling with regards to moving forward in terms of local water action, and what you would like to see in our community in the Twin Sioux area as well in that regard.
That's a great question, and nice to see you, Elaine. I think it's probably a great idea when we look at how we connect the different generations. When we look at traditional family life cycle of Anishinaabe people, our grandmas and grandpas were very much active and a part of our younger generations. That's how that knowledge transfer became generational, actually. Aunties, uncles were also very much responsible with, teaching and showing and making sure that the next generation coming learned about roles and responsibilities, learned about, the ideas and understandings of how to make our life a good life. Now, interruptions happened, like colonization and other things like residential school and world wars and all these other different sad and traumatic events throughout our history that kind of interrupted that traditional role that we might have had a long time ago in our family life cycle. We're seeing a revitalization, we're seeing a healing, we're seeing, where we're witnessing again multi-generational households, which is fabulous. So I think as a grandma, an auntie, a mom, a professional in the community, someone who is also holding some information, I think it's really important for us to use that storytelling in that traditional sense, where we gather. And of course, now we're hopefully coming out of COVID, we can reawaken those kinds of things again. One of the things I have found in the work as the director of the Health and Human Services here for BFN is that some people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable about face-to-face interaction. And, how do we do that again? Because it's been 2 years. We hear about little ones who this is all they know is, having a mask on their face at school. That's normal to them. So how do we work with that? Not against it. How do we work with what we're faced with right now? And I think being open, in our community, looking for people who are willing to be engaged. I'm one of them. There are many of us who are willing to be engaged. Reach out to us, and then, think outside the box. What's the standard or normalized way we used to do things? What's the COVID way we've been doing things? And what is this new normal going to look like as we look to breathe more life, continued life into how we bring about, ensuring those traditions aren't lost, from tapping the trees right now in the season that we're in with maple syrup making season. There's lots of families in our area who practice sugar bush. Reaching out to those people, finding them, and maybe going from a seasonal approach. How do we honor and make use of this beautiful life that's around us, around water, around the Great Lakes region. So, those are just some thoughts off the top of my head. And of course, I like to talk. So you and I probably need to talk on the side sometime. I don't want to take anybody else's time on the panel. All right. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Liz. All right. So in the essence of time, we will move on to our next panelist. Again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your email in case anyone has any more questions. Okay, so with that, I am going to start sharing my screen again, and we'll introduce our next speaker. Stevie, give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Thank you.
And that's you. Over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Next up, we have Rebecca Durazio. Rebecca, we're super happy to have you back. She was also was one of our panelists last year. So thank you again for agreeing to be here and talk about invasive species in the Upper Great Lakes. So Rebecca is the Aquatic Invasive Species Specialist at the Invasive Species Centre in Sault Ste. Marie, where she has worked there since 2016. Rebecca received her honors degree in biology from Algoma University. At the Invasive Species Centre, Rebecca works on programs related to aquatic invasive species prevention and outreach, and uses digital tools such as social media, influencer marketing, email marketing, web content development, and webinars. Rebecca also works in the Zooplankton Diagnostics Lab at the Invasive Species Centre, which analyzes water samples in Ontario for presence or absence of invasive mussel felagers. So, Rebecca, I'm not sure if I said that last word, but I tried.
You did. You nailed it.
Great. I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you for being here, and let me know if your screen is good to share.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. It seems to be working okay. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yep.
In the correct view, not my presenter view or anything? Okay.
Yep.
We're good then. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for having me for the second year in a row at this great event. I'm super excited to talk to you about aquatic invasive species today. I'll first just start by introducing the Invasive Species Centre a little bit, which is where I work. We're a not-for-profit organization, and we connect stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. We have tons of great resources on our website. You can sign up to our newsletter, our biweekly media scan, and get some event and webinar invitations, because we have a monthly webinar series that's going pretty well. So if you're interested, that's our website, and you can sign up for tons of good stuff. So I'll start off, I guess, just really quickly by introducing what an invasive species is for those on the call that might not be familiar. But a species is considered invasive when it's introduced to an ecosystem outside of its native range and has the potential to impact the ecology, economy, or society in this introduced range. So there is a little bit of a difference there. We can have species that appear outside of their native range, but if they're not doing anything to the economy or the environment in a negative way, then they're not considered invasive. Aquatic invasive species specifically, they can impact biodiversity by outcompeting species for food and habitat. They can impact the economy and society by negatively impacting activities like recreational and commercial fishing, boating, cottaging, lakefront use, and all other kinds of things. So very quickly tonight, I'd like to talk to you about 3 aquatic invaders. These are the ones that I speak to the most, I would say. So hopefully we can get you guys some good information here. But these 3 examples would be sea lamprey, zebra and quagga mussels, and Asian carps. And I guess I'm kind of going through it in a story fashion. The first is an example of a really bad invader that we've seen in the Soo specifically even, that we've been lucky enough to manage. The second one with these invasive mussels, they're very prolific invaders and they're all across the basin, and we haven't been so lucky in terms of management there. And then lastly is kind of an up and coming threat to the basin, which would be Asian carps. So sea lamprey, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with them if you live in the sewer area, but these are a parasitic fish that are native to the Atlantic Ocean. And they entered the basin through man-made shipping canals and were first observed in Lake Ontario in the 1830s. So they've been around the basin for a long time. And just existence in general, they've survived 4 mass extinctions. They actually are, obviously, as they're from the Atlantic Ocean, they spend most of their time in salt water and then a little bit in fresh, but as invaders, they've adapted completely to freshwater, which is really interesting. This is just a little identification graphic here because we do have native lamprey in the Great Lakes Basin. So the main thing that you'll see here is this sharp teeth with that rasp-like tongue. And a really key identifying feature of them is that they have 2 dorsal fins that are separated. So what they do with that rasp-like mouth and all those teeth is they attach to fish, and then they'll use those teeth and tongue to feed on the fish's bodily fluids, which is really gross. They're kind of like the vampires of the sea, if you will. And hosts will either die directly from the attack or from an infection in the wounds. In their native range, the fish are much larger, so they are not susceptible to dying from these attacks. We don't have fish that massive in the Great Lakes Basin that can survive. So it's very negatively impacting the species in the basin. Before the invasion, commercial fisheries were harvesting about 15 million pounds of lake trout annually. Once these populations of lamprey exploded, commercial fisheries were harvesting 300,000 pounds of lake trout annually. So that's just 2% of the normal amount that they were harvesting pre-invasion, which just goes to show how impactful these species were, or these lamprey were, sorry. Luckily, by the 1950s, sorry, I guess not luckily, but by the 1950s, the Great Lakes fishery had collapsed. The ecosystem was seriously injured, and the governments of Canada and the US recognized that we need to do something about this. So we did, and we were really lucky to find 2 lampricides, TFM and balicide, and they're applied to streams and rivers during the larval phase of the sea lamprey's life cycle. And it interrupts their metabolism, and it eventually leads to their death before they can metamorphosize into the adult form, go out and be those parasitic vampire fish, like I mentioned. So we're really lucky that we were able to discover 2 very selective lampricides. We're not always lucky with invasive species. And then there's also some additional management techniques like barriers and traps, and some pheromone studies. So with this control program, we've reduced populations of sea lamprey by 90% in most areas of the Great Lakes. But without this control program, we would see these populations rise again and the fishery would collapse. So it just goes to show that once a species establishes, it's very, very difficult to prevent them from spreading, and we can't eradicate them, but we're lucky enough that we were able to do that with sea lamprey, and this is something we'll always have to do. But prevention is much more cost effective than control. So next, I'd like to talk about zebra and quagga mussels, and I'm sure many people have heard of these tiny invaders. But these are some freshwater mussels that can be found throughout Canada, mostly centralized and then a little bit in Quebec and Manitoba, but we're trying to prevent their westward spread as well. These guys are native to the Black Sea region of Eurasia, and they were brought to the Great Lakes Basin via ballast water in that larval veliger stage and have spread throughout North America. So this is just a little identification picture here. This is the zebra mussel. It lays flat, whereas the quagga mussel doesn't. Quagga mussels are a little bit bigger, not much. The zebra mussel has that zigzag pattern and they're more triangular, whereas the quagga mussel is a little rounder and they have more concentric rings, I guess, if you will. So these guys form really dense colonies. They can clog intake pipes, boat motors, and even colonize on other native mussels and suffocate them. So this is kind of just a little impactful photo here of a boat motor that's been clogged up. It's really negatively impacting hydro facilities, camps, cottages, that kind of thing. Not great to have them around there. These sharp shells, they'll wash up on beaches. They're a hazard to swimmers because they can cut your feet. They're also really good filter feeders. So zebra and quagga mussels consume plankton, and plankton is the basis of the aquatic food web. In one way or another, most species depend on plankton. And so they reduce that for native species. And then that filtering can also allow more sunlight to penetrate the water, and that'll promote toxic algal blooms. There's some recent research that has come out that quagga mussels specifically are essentially controlling the phosphorus levels in the Great Lakes Basin, which is really concerning because scientists can't predict these levels anymore. It's just dependent on the quagga mussels. And then bioaccumulation of toxins within these mussels when they filter the water has been linked to massive bird and fish die-offs through botulism, because round gobies will eat the mussels, and then there's fish and other birds that will eat round gobies, and then they get poisoned with these toxins. So not great for a number of reasons. And unfortunately, let me just back up, I guess. I'm not really done talking about these guys, but unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do on the large scale to eradicate them. We're not as fortunate like we are with sea lamprey in this instance. Once they're established, they're pretty much here for good. At the ISC, in my bio, I mentioned that I work in our Zooplankton Diagnostics Lab. So what we do is we go through water samples that have been submitted to us from different lake associations across the province that are at high risk. So they'll have high calcium levels, they'll have public access points, whether that's a boat launch or just a public beach. And we test them to see if they have presence or absence of these invasive mussels. And then from there, we kind of just do some preventative maintenance, I guess, if you will, just trying to teach the public to not to clean and drain and dry their boats and any other gear so that they prevent the spread across the province. So that's kind of the gist of the mussel invasion. And then next, I want to talk about a species, or 4 species, sorry, that have not established in the basin, but are quite a threat. And that would be Asian carps. And usually when you hear the term Asian carps, most people think of this one right here, the silver carp. But in fact, it's actually 4 species. There's bighead carp, silver carp, grass carp, and black carp. And I could talk to you about these guys all day long because this is 90% of my job is these 4 fish. So I'll get into some identification here with the 4 of them. The main 3 things we look for, the first being across all 4 species, is this short dorsal fin. You don't see a ton of native species in the basin that just have this one little narrow short dorsal fin. And then the eye placement. On black carp and grass carp specifically, you'll see it in the middle of their head, whereas bighead and silver carp, it's underneath the middle of their head. So they kind of look upside down. And then all 4 of them lack those barbels or whiskers that you'll see within other species in the carp family. Most of them have those whiskers. So they do not. So those are kind of the things we look for. Their impacts, all 4 of them can grow really, really big, really fast, and they have huge appetites to match. So black carp get the largest. They can be up to 6 feet long. They have caught a couple, I think it was last year in somewhere south of Illinois. It was almost 120 pounds. Not great. And those ones eat mussels, so that's not zebra and quagga mussels, unfortunately. But they were brought to the southern United States in the late 60s on purpose. We brought them here for biocontrol, and then they escaped the facilities that they were brought to, and they've been spreading throughout the southern United States and up towards the Great Lakes. So silver and bighead carp are kind of knocking at the doorstep of Lake Michigan through around Chicago. And then we have grass carp that are coming the other way towards Lake Erie. And we've recently found natural reproduction in 2 United States tributaries of Lake Erie. So grass carp is the main focus right now for the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes, and where most of our efforts are focused is prevention of grass carp, which consume aquatic vegetation. And that would be a really big problem for wetlands, nurseries for fish that we like to angle, and all sorts of things. So these guys would quickly outcompete native species for food and resources. They'd cause negative impacts to biodiversity, fishing, beachfronts, cottages, all kinds of stuff would be negatively impacted by Asian carps. And these are the ones I mentioned earlier, silver carp. When you hear Asian carps, most people think of these ones because they're the ones that jump out of the water in alarming numbers. They don't do this in their native range, which is really interesting. And scientists think that it might be due to those overcrowding populations of them. And then when they're startled by like vibrations in the water from boat motors, they jump out. There was an article actually that came out when I first started my position at the ISC in 2016 about a woman who was fishing and she broke her jaw because she got smacked in the face by a silver carp. She had to have her mouth wired shut for weeks. So not great. And a little dangerous. So that's kind of, I guess, a very quick 101 on a few invaders in the basin. So next, before I wrap, I just kind of briefly wanted to mention some things you can do. Mainly, we like to teach people to identify aquatic invasive species and then report them. That's kind of best case scenario. Specifically with grass carp, if you report them, it aids in early detection, and then Fisheries and Oceans Canada can kind of enact their response. And then for some other species, it's really nice for us to have that information when we're kind of doing some data and tracking and collection and stuff. Next is, don't dump your bait. You never know what's hiding in your bait bucket. You could have a zebra mussel veliger that you can't see, and you're dumping it into a water body that doesn't have invasive mussels, but can support their establishment. And then we have an established population few years down the road. Clean, drain, dry your gear, same thing. I didn't mention any aquatic invasive plants, but those guys can get trapped in boats and other gear, and you can be transporting it from one water body to another. And then lastly, spread the word, not the species. So hopefully I didn't take up too much time there, but I know I flew through that and that was a ton of information. So if you have any questions about any of the species that I mentioned or any other aquatic invaders, this is my contact information. So please feel free to reach out to me. And if I can't answer your question, I will try my best to connect you with someone who can. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca. That was, I kept looking at Kevin and John because I know that they all work with the water. So I'm like, just like being curious. I said, what does everyone think? Thank you for sharing. Do you think that the Asian carp are, and I know they're not in Lake Superior, but do you think with climate change and the water warming, is that why there might be coming our way?
Yeah, so none of the species are established in the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes, which is really good news. As I mentioned, grass carp specifically are very close. They're in a couple of tributaries. So just like the Sandusky River, the Maumee River, which is in Ohio, and there are 2 tributaries in the US, but definitely with warming climates. We actually just posted some new research on our website, asiancarp.ca, on climate change and how that could impact the spread, but we definitely could see them establishing, if they were to establish in the basin at all, their spread could be much quicker and be more supported in Lake Superior with warming climates. Same goes for zebra and quagga mussels. Right now in Lake Superior, they're not as prolific here just because we don't have the nutrient levels to support them in Lake Superior, but that's not to say that climate change couldn't aid in that one day.
Thanks so much. If anyone has a question for Rebecca, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Rebecca, if you don't mind maybe putting your email in the chat. I know
Oh,
your
absolutely.
slides, we're going fairly quick there, and perhaps people may not have questions now, but they might have questions later. That would be very helpful.
Okay, I think I spelled it right. New last name, getting used to it.
Awesome.
So much.
Oh, and thank you, Tony. That's very nice to read.
So, sorry, go ahead, Stevie.
No, I was just going to say to Kevin or John, is there anything with invasive species on the other side of the border you would wanted to just add to that, to Rebecca's? On a quick share.
Well, the one thing, because I'll talk a little bit about prevention and early detection and response in mind, but it'll be very brief. I want to go back to that sea lamprey for a second, where, you know, we have these two chemicals that can be used to treat sea lamprey, but that's as close, to my knowledge, that's as close to a silver bullet as we have in treating invasive species. And I think they tested, I'd have to look at the number, but I think they tested over 5,000 chemicals or something like that. So it wasn't like, you know, it wasn't easy to get there, right? And that's for one invasive species. So that's why you'll hear us, all of us, over and over again talking about prevention being the key, and then early detection is pretty much the best you can do after that, because it's really rare to be able to find something like we have for sea lamprey. It's just really rare to be able to deal with those populations after they're established. So it's great to have people on here interested to learn more, and hopefully, you know, if you see something, you say something to the right folks that can get out there and try to manage those species.
Thanks so much, Kevin. We're lucky to have you guys on both sides of our borders helping us. Before we move on, Rebecca, there's a question from Simon. Was there any spike in sea lamprey population seen that you know of due to COVID keeping control crews out of the lakes for a year?
So I know that with COVID restrictions, there was some limitations on their operations. I can't say for sure, but I will post a link in here to an annual report that came out for 2020 for their annual report on the sea lamprey control program that might have that information. And I read it a while ago and I can't remember off the top of my head, but there definitely were limitations to their management program due to COVID. So there very well could have been a spike.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, well, I think we should continue to move on. Emily is going to introduce Kevin, our next speaker up.
Thanks, Stevie. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Lots of great information sharing tonight. It's my privilege now to announce our third speaker and introduce Kevin Kapusinski. Kevin earned his BS and MS degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and his Ph.D. from the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Between earning his MS and PhD degrees, he worked as a pallid sturgeon biologist for the state of Montana and as a fisheries biologist for the state of Wisconsin. Kevin joined Lake Superior State University in 2014, where he continues to serve as an associate professor in the School of Natural Resources and Environment and as the assistant director of research for the Center for Freshwater Research and Education. So I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker from across the river. Kevin, over to you. You should be able to share your screen.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Can you see the presentation?
No, we can't, Kevin.
We tested this.
The share screen option at the bottom should be your next step. on the Zoom. There we go. Okay, we can see the slide, and if you want to put it into the view. Okay, so we're seeing presenter view.
I will get there, I promise.
I think you're
There we
doing
go.
a great job.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin.
How about
Take her
that?
away.
Okay, is my time up yet? All right. So thank you for having me. We are right across the river. So I'm in the new Seafree building, and I'm pointing at the Bushplay Museum. So I'm right across the river from the Bushplay Museum. So I'm going to talk today about European frogbit, which is an aquatic plant that is invasive in our region. And sometimes these plants are often overlooked, or we may underestimate some of the effects that they may have on the ecosystem. So hopefully, y'all can learn something new. They're certainly not, in my opinion, as exciting as fish. My background is in fish ecology and fisheries management, but we're going to talk about frogbit tonight. So this map shows the native and introduced range of European frogbit. So it's really native to Europe and Northwestern Asia. So like many of our invasive species, it's from Eurasia. And ironically, this species is endangered in Switzerland within its native range. But here, there are areas where it reaches, really dense populations that are potentially, causing ecological harm. And so, they've been listed as invasive. So, as Rebecca mentioned, one of the important things y'all can do is learn how to identify invasive species. So, European frogbit is pretty easy to learn to identify, although again, it can often be overlooked because it superficially looks pretty similar to some of our natives. So it looks like a water lily. It just looks like a small, a cute baby water lily, right? But it's not. So our native lilies are rooted plants, and the European frogbit is a floating plant. So you will see on the left of this image, there are some roots hanging down from that plant, but those will be floating in the water. They won't be rooted into the sediment. It has these small heart-shaped leaves. So the picture on the right, that leaf, that plant is actually, like in the palm of someone's hand. So I'll show a picture later with some like a quarter in it for scale, but there's somewhere around a quarter to $1/2 size. They're not the individual leaves are not very large. You could see they have a little divot with near the base where the stem attaches, and then they may or may not have a white flower. They don't often flower up here. They primarily, we think, reproduce asexually. So they grow these runners or stolons, and then they can grow a daughter plant off of those, which is a clone, a genetic clone, or they can produce a turion, which you see this red arrow pointing to a turion, which is an overwinter bud. So in the fall, that bud will fall off of the plant, sink to the bottom, overwinter, and then the next spring, as the water starts to warm, that turion will start to form gases, float up to the surface, and then that turion will open, and then this is a super tiny European frog. So if you think like the adult plant is cute because it's so small, the emerging turion is even tinier. But it just looks like a miniature version of the plant itself. So again, superficially, they look like water lilies, but they're really quite a bit smaller and not closely related. So here on the left, you can see some European frogbit floating, and then there's these really tiny plants floating, and that's you probably have seen those if you spend time outside wetlands. That's lemna or duckweed. That's a native species, is really tiny floating plants. And then there's frogbit next to it. And on the right, we have a frog sitting on frogbit leaf. So that kind of gives you some idea of the scale. It's a pretty small plant. Now, the invasion history is a bit strange in that it actually started with an intentional introduction. So frogbit was brought to Ottawa as an ornamental, and then people say escaped, right? I don't know if a plant can escape, but the plant escaped the ornamental facility. And some 40 years later was found in northern New York in the Oswegatchie River, which is a tributary to the St. Lawrence River. So now, access to the Great Lakes. And so we start to see westward movement, Lake Erie in 76, now back east in Lake Ontario. So it kind of flip-flops west-east. It's not necessarily that the plant is moving around like that, it's just, people are starting to identify and locate it. And then in 2000, it showed up in Michigan and Lake St. Clair and Detroit River areas. And then started to spread around Michigan in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then in 2011, it was found in Monroe. And then somewhere 2010, 2012, kind of depends who you ask, it was found in the St. Mary's River. So this is really far north for these invasions. And as you know, the St. Mary's River is quite cold. So I think we're probably at the northern extent or close to it of what the plant can survive based on water temperatures anyway. And then it started to be found around the state again. So things really started to happen in say the last 10 years. So again, it was intentionally introduced back in the 30s, and in the last 10 years really blew up around Michigan. And you may have seen it show up in the news because it's found in the Grand River, right? And so there's, a lot of these things get a lot more attention when they show up around, an urban center. And there's certainly some ecological concerns that have been raised around European frogbit. So here we see a pretty dense mat of frogbit growing in this wetland. And here, if you take a frog's eye view, you can see how dense that carpet is. Right? It's like just a carpet of frogbit, which of course is going to limit light penetration below it. So it's potentially shading out our native plants. It's going to use nutrients to grow, right? So it's probably sequestering some nutrients that then are not available for native species. And then there's some serious, like some of the most serious concerns about dissolved oxygen. So especially when these carpets of frogbit die back in the fall, and they die back pretty early compared to some of our hardier native species. So all that decomposition is going to chew up the oxygen in the water, and you're going to have very low dissolved oxygen, which of course is a problem for fish and potentially invertebrates and others. And then the other concerns are around either habitat use by native species or even movements. So some animals, even if they can move through these areas, they may avoid them because of the dense carpets, dense mats of the European frogbit. And then of course, human use, like people aren't going to want to wade or boat or kayak or canoe through this. It's very difficult because it's so thick. And this image just shows how convoluted those runners, those stolons and the daughter plants, and they all start to attach to each other. So when you try to remove it by hand, you're pulling out obviously large quantities of frogbit, but you're also tangling up native species. So hand removals are used for management, but we're also incidentally going to be removing some native plants. It's just too hard to only remove frogbit. So the rapid spread, the dense mats, and then the potential ecological effects have landed frogbit on Michigan's naughty list, the prohibited list. So you cannot possess, it's illegal to possess frogbit in Michigan, even if you can go find it at a pet store or order it online or go collect it from the wild. It's not legal to possess it without a permit. So these concerns have led to building some research around European frogbit. I'm not going to talk about our research program too much time. I'm just going to spend a minute or two on it just to let you know about some of what we're building up, but I'm not even going to really talk about the results. I just want you to know that we're engaged in this. We've been conducting research for the past few years, and the goal of this is really to number one is to try to better understand the habitat characteristics associated with frogbit. So where does frogbit live? Where does it not live? And hopefully figure out why. And then to assess the effectiveness of hand removal, because it is a common management technique. And then assess the response of plants, invertebrates, fish to that hand removal. So if we remove frogbit, how does the ecosystem respond? So what we're doing is we for the last few years, we've set up these plots around the St. Mary's River, and we collect all kinds of water quality data. So it might be depth, dissolved oxygen, temperature, turbidity, or how clear the water is, a suite of other variables. Then we do an assessment of the aquatic plants there. So we see one of our student research technicians peering through the water in that viewer. We do DNet sweeps for aquatic invertebrates. And then some of the sites we're actively removing the frogbit from it, and then some we leave it there. And so we're trying to compare how the ecosystem responds, whether we remove it or not. And then at some sites we put out data loggers. So these loggers can collect temperature, dissolved oxygen, and pH we have ours set, I believe, every 30 minutes, and then that collects that through the whole season. And then we recover those at the end, and we have a whole year's worth of data. So the amount of data you can generate from those is pretty incredible. And then in the middle, there's just an image of a minnow trap. And so underneath the water surface there's a minnow trap. That's what that float and rope is in the center of the plot. So we'll come back the next day, empty the minnow trap, and see what kind of fishes were living there. And so this coming year is going to be the last year that we have active grant funding to research frogbit. And then so in the next probably 2 years, we'll probably, hopefully have some publications coming out related to this research. These two images just show what it looks like before and after hand removal. So you could look at this and say, oh, wow, hand removal really works, right? You can go out and at least on a small scale, you can do a really good job removing European frogbit. But what our research is going to hopefully tell us is whether or not that matters ecologically. Like, is there a response by the ecosystem if you remove it? So what we've seen so far is that hand removal is very effective at these sites. It doesn't grow back within the same growing season, but it'll take some more data analysis to get whether or not this is having an effect on the other flora and fauna at the sites. So what can you do? So some of this has been touched on already, but cleaning your boat, your motor, your trailer, et cetera, by removing all the plants, all the debris or mud. This picture is an extreme example. Sometimes you pull out from the launch, especially if the wind's blowing into the launch, there's all kind of plants there and it gets all over your trailer. But you really have to look. I have my boat has carpeted bunks on the bottom. And in one of the bunks this last year, where the carpet is folded and glued, I had a plant growing out of it, right? So one seed got into that fold in the carpet of the bunk, germinated because that carpet stays wet enough, and grew. So I had to pick it out of there. So it's not just like these giant hunks of vegetation hanging on your trailer. You really have to be diligent to stop the spread of these species. The drain and dry, that's another tough one, right? It's easy to pull the drain plug on your boat, but there's transom well, there's live wells, there's storage compartments that don't always dry out. Some are just not very dry storage. So you really need to open those up, air them out, let them dry. The minimum recommended is 5 days. And even like this picture shows, even the lower unit on your boat holds water. So what I do is when I pull my boat out of the water, I get it to where I can tilt the motor all the way down, let the water drain out, then I tilt it all the way up, let it drain, then I tilt it all the way down again. Then I put it in the towing position and go. And you have to do that a couple of times to get all that water out of the lower unit. So again, it really does require some attention to do this the right way. And then you could disinfect. Now, not everyone has this capability. Hot water is recommended. It can kill off a number of our species, but not everyone has access to water in that 150 to 200 degree range, to hose down their equipment. You could also use chlorine or Virkon as a disinfectant. Again, there's certain things you may not want to spray bleach on. So, you have to make those decisions yourself. And then, what the dosage you use or concentration you use depends on what chemical or form of the chemical. So you can look those up online, whether using a bleach or you can buy granulated chemicals. So again, I'll leave that up to you to look those up online, but Really, if you can clean, then disinfect, and then dry, like that's the ultimate, but not everyone has that capability. But that is what would be suggested. And then again, learn to identify frog bits. So those small heart-shaped leaves, it may have roots, but it won't be rooted to the sediment. It may have a small white flower, and then it may have these stolons, these runners, and these turions. And if you can, take a picture from multiple angles with something for scale. So here you see someone holding the frog bit, and there's also a quarter in the image. We don't want you to take the frog bit with you because, again, it's illegal to possess. So take good pictures if you can. And then once you have those pictures, I would also encourage you to record GPS coordinates and the date that you found it. So you can get an app on your phone for GPS coordinates, or even some of the plant species you may be able to identify with certain apps that you can download. And then what do you do with that? You can contact your local biologist or call the invasive species hotline. Now, your local biologist may be, so here on our side, we have these CISMAs, these cooperative invasive species management areas, DNR. On the Canadian side, there's DFO, and then there's they changed their name. So they're going for the longest acronym award. It's now, I'm going to try this, the Ontario Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources, and Forestry. I had to learn that myself this morning. And so when you do this, when you report these observations, they may, especially if it's in a new area, someone's going to probably go out and try to confirm it. And then it will be added to our base of knowledge. So this is just a map I pulled off MISIN, which is the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. Anyone can go on here. And I pulled this map by going to the Explore tab and then using the Species Data Viewer. And so every blue dot on here is a confirmed frogbit sighting. And then on this map, I just blew out the area around Muskong River down here where it's very densely populated. And then I changed the base layer. So on the left, you could see like a Google Earth base layer. So it looks like a more natural base layer. And here's the Muskong River coming out. And, we have this area where there's just been a tremendous number of sightings. So you can go on this MISIN network, and it's not just for frogbit. This is any invasive species that they have data on. You can go in there and check that out. And then another really good source of information for invasive species is USGS. They keep distribution maps on all kinds of invasive species. They have really good ones on aquatic invasive species. So this map you see, the dark red is where the watersheds that frogbit has been located in. So you don't see, I believe they use like a yellowish orange for the native range. And of course, you don't see any of that here because frogbit isn't native to North America. But something like rusty crayfish and some of our other species that may be native to parts of North America, but not the Great Lakes, you'll see different colors on the maps, and then they'll have a key on there to tell you exactly what it is you're looking at. But when you identify something, it gets confirmed and gets uploaded into these maps. We use these, the researchers and managers use these to develop our research projects and our management plans. So it really is helpful. So if you see something, I really hope you take the time to report it. Another thing you could do is participate in an agency coordinated removal event. So again, we don't want you doing this on your own. It's not legal to have the frogbits, but you can go to one of these coordinated removal events. And this particular event, we had a couple, 3 dozen garbage bags full of it. I mean, I can't remember how much it was, but they bag it up and then it gets landfilled. So it has to be disposed of properly, and they take care of that. So you go and help, and then the agency folks will dispose of the invasive species. So with that, I'm going to end. There's a lot of people here to acknowledge. A lot of our team members here at CFRE at Lake State have contributed to our developing this research program in frogbit. But we also have really great collaborators at Michigan's Eagle and are also project sponsors. And we've been funded by the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program, and then again supported by the local SISMA and the one of our collaborators, Nick Castle, used to be at the SISMA, went to the UP Resource Conservation and Development Council. So like most of what we do, this is a team effort, and invasive species really even broader than that. Just as a society, we all have to participate if we're going to do that prevention, especially that prevention and then that early detection and rapid response. So thank you for your time. If we have time, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Kevin. Much appreciated. Lots of great work being done by your team. Again, excellent information. Like our other panelists, I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, putting your email in the chat in case there's any questions. In the essence of time, we are going to move to our next presenter. If anyone has any burning questions, please do put them in the chat and we will hopefully get to them at the end. So Stevie, over to you. I am going to share my screen and you can introduce our final speaker.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks again, Kevin, for your wonderful presentation. I lost my words there. Sorry, my dog just jumped in my lap. So on to our last but not least, Jon Doubek. Jon is a freshwater ecologist and limnologist who is broadly interested in plankton ecology, water quality, and food web interactions. Jon studies how multiple environmental factors affect physical and chemical properties and ecological communities in lakes and reservoirs, which has implications for ecosystems, services, and management. Jon uses a combination of local and regional field sampling, analyzing large-scale data sets, and interdisciplinary and international team science to address research questions. Jon is very passionate about teaching, mentoring, and connecting his work to management, policy, and community. So we are really grateful to have you, Jon. Jon also has a newborn, so I really appreciate, Beth told me that you're a new father, so we really appreciate you sticking out, being our last presenter, and being here to share your knowledge with us. So I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Stevie, he's not able to unmute
Yeah,
himself.
I just changed it. Sorry, I thought I put it on opposite. Sorry, Jon. There you go.
All right, thank you very much, Stevie, for that introduction. And hopefully you all can see my screen.
Yeah, good to go.
Great. And thank you very much for the invitation to join today and talk to everybody about a little bit of some projects that are ongoing here at Lake State and beyond. And also thank you to everybody for sticking with to the end here at 8:20 to listen to the final talk. As Stevie mentioned, I'm at Lake Superior State University. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Natural Resources, as well as with CFRE, the Center for Freshwater Research and Education. And just like Kevin, I'm upstairs right now in the new CFRE building, but was looking over across to Ontario just an hour ago. So it's a really nice spot. And my expertise is pretty broad in aquatic ecology. And today I'll be sharing two really quick short stories, one on storms and one on microplastics, on some work going on in Lake State and beyond. So two short stories jumping in. First, we'll look at some storm impacts on lakes with a global collaboration, and then talking about some work on the St. Mary's River with microplastics. So climate change and storms. I think oftentimes when we think of climate change, we think first of altered atmospheric temperatures, maybe warmer temperatures, and also warmer temperatures in water systems as well. But also with climate change, many regions are experiencing an increase frequency and duration of storm events, both wind and rainstorms, like this storm. This is a picture taken in Switzerland over Lake Geneva. And I'm a part of a global team of international scientists, limnologists that seek to better understand how storms under the umbrella of climate change can impact lakes and lake function. So this team, you can see more about them here, some of the core members and lots of data contributors. And here's a website down here if you're interested to learn more. It's the acronym is GEISHA, but just like a previous one, there's actually very long individual words that goes into that. But it's, there's a lot of studies at the local and regional scale to look at the impacts of storms on lakes. And part of this collaboration is to amass long-term and high-frequency lake data to look at this on a global scale. And this is a map of lakes that we've brought together for this project so far. There's about 30 lakes from different regions across the planet. Many lakes pretty close by to here, such as Harp Lake, which is in Ontario, Canada, for example. And before Lake State, I was at the University of Vermont as a postdoc research associate. And a big part of my job was to bring some of these data sets together, QA, QC, code, doing a lot of stats, and looking at things like weather data. So nearby weather stations, or maybe there's actually a weather station on a buoy on a lake that's collecting high frequency data, things like wind and rain. Lake physical metrics. I'll be talking about temperature here as kind of a snapshot study for this, looking at profiles of lake temperature, for example, a lot of water chemistry variables, and also phytoplankton, as mentioned earlier, kind of serving it as the base of the food chain in lake systems. And so there's lots of different projects going on. This collaboration is continuing to the future. And I took part in leading one project looking at how storms impact lake temperatures. So for this, again, just a really quick sort of sneak peek into this study, we looked at how surface temperature changes in lakes before and after wind and rainstorm events during the summer in lakes. And if there's any lake characteristics that may mediate these storm-induced temperature changes. Do you see similar changes in temperature across all lake types, or are there certain lake types where temperature changes more or less, for example? And during the summer, because during the winter, lakes are in northern hemisphere places more isothermal, for example. So there's not much change in terms of temperature from the surface to the bottom. But in the summer, you have stratification that sets up where you have warmer surface waters and you have colder bottom waters in lakes. And so with things like wind and rain, that can mix those different layers together, altering temperature in the water. And also from rain, you can have rain dropping down directly on the lake. That could be a different temperature from the lake, or it can be coming in from the catchment. So thinking about how land use might impact what's running off into a lake as well. And so temperature, it's really important for many organisms. Many organisms have an optimal temperature range. And so if temperature changes from storms, even on a very short scale, before and after a storm event, maybe there's a selective advantage where some fast growing taxa like phytoplankton can take off, and there can be differences in the community composition. But I'm not going to show any figures from this. I just wanted to take a sort of a one takeaway from this project. Which was in a paper published last year. But we found in deep lakes, so there are 18 lakes we looked at, millions of data points looking at how temperatures change from storm events. And so Lake Superior was not a lake in the study, but just to give you an example of a lake nearby, of course, as perspective. But we found a lower temperature change from storms in deep lakes, such as Lake Superior, and a greater temperature change from storms in shallower lakes, such as Brevoort Lake, which is a popular tourist recreation spot in the eastern Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And, thinking of one in Ontario, maybe Echo Lake in Ontario as well. And so the idea here is that it's not that storms won't impact deep lakes. It's just that other aspects of storms, such as maybe runoff of nutrients or sediments, may be more important in affecting lake function in deeper lakes versus changes in temperature, for example. Okay, so there are storm impacts on lakes, and now jumping into microplastics. And microplastics could also be connected to storms as well. It wasn't a main focus of what we'll talk about for this example, but with increased storm events and rain events, that could also increase runoff from the catchment. And so maybe there is hot spots, or there could be more microplastics running off in certain times of the year, for example. So microplastics, an emerging contaminant, one that is relatively understudied in freshwater systems compared to marine environments. It's just it's a hot topic. More and more research is coming out to better understand the drivers of microplastics in freshwater systems, as well as the effects on food webs as well. And there's a couple of news articles here, some recent papers that have looked at these plastics and different aquatic organisms might consume those microplastics, such as fish, for example. And if fish are consuming a lot of microplastics, that could be harmful in terms of digestion, for example. If the microplastics are in the GI tract and it's hard for the fish to digest food as easy. And there's also some evidence to suggest that really, really small microplastics can actually be assimilated into muscle tissue in fish. And so therefore things that eat fish, such as humans or birds, may also be consuming microplastics that are taken up by the fish as well. So for this kind of sneak peek in microplastics, I want to give a shout out to Tristan Compton, who is a recent graduate from Lake Superior State University in conservation biology just last fall. And he was awarded a undergraduate Michigan Sea Grant environmental internship to study sort of factors affecting microplastics in the St. Mary's River. And so he was out and I was out with him as well as other students last summer sampling for microplastics, and he'd go back to the lab and actually identify, sort out what's a microplastic from other stuff collected, which we'll get into. So microplastics, they vary in all sizes, shapes, and types. Here's a nice assortment of different types of plastics here. Microplastics typically smaller than 5 millimeters. And there's different ways to sort of categorize these microplastics, these degraded consumer products, for example. You have things like fibers. So maybe this is from, clothing or fishing lines, for example. Films, so maybe from plastic bags or wrappers. Foam, so maybe foam cups, packaging, takeout containers, beads, and then fragments, which is sort of a smaller versions of larger things like maybe a plastic bottle, for example. And Tristan, kind of a main question, wanted to look at the main types of microplastics found and what concentrations there were in the St. Mary's River. And so Tristan went out and sampled quite a bit last summer. This is a map just to orient you a little bit. The top right is sort of a zoomed out version here on Michigan, and here's the St. Mary's River kind of circled in white, which is hard to see here with the background. But there's the eastern upper peninsula of Michigan over on the bottom left, and then the southern tip of Ontario on the top right. And these white dots were the sample locations that Tristan sampled. And he covered the full extent pretty much of the St. Mary's River, all the way from the Lake Superior outflow, right downtown, kind of by the locks in the Sioux, in the Sioux, down by Sugar Island, just north of Muskong Bay, and then all the way down to the Lake Huron inflow as well. So some long and fun days trailing boats and launching and loading them back up and sampling for microplastics. And the actual field sampling protocol is pretty simple. You have what's called a plankton tow net, a fine mesh net that for these we collected just subsurface water samples for microplastics. But you can tie these off to the boat or just hold them where most of it's submerged under the surface. And this is filtering out really small stuff, but capturing microplastics and larger things. So you get microplastics, but you can also get, aquatic insects, plankton, all sorts of other stuff. We also caught a toe biter once, a really large one in the middle of a river system. So that was that one was a shocker. But you could also do two at once. You could tie them off to each side of the boat and get a replicate at each site. So Tristan went out and sampled each of these sites seasonally a couple of times, and we ran out of time. But the idea, sort of as future directions, would be to look at how land use can affect microplastic immediately in the river, but also the transport downstream. And also potentially how storms could affect microplastics in these systems as well. But then, you take it back to lab and you do some digestions, and under a microscope, start counting some microplastics. So again, just a really quick sneak peek at some of Tristan's findings. What this is showing is some different categories of microplastics: fibers, films, foams, fragments, and beads. And on the y-axis is a number of microplastics in some sort of a standardized volume of water. And microplastics were found in each sample. At the maximum, up to 7 microplastics were found per minute in terms of trawling in the water column. Fibers and films were the most commonly found microplastics, which is pretty similar to other studies as well. And most of those microplastics were of larger sizes, so a little bit larger size classes. But again, really cool next steps would be looking more at how different factors affect these microplastics seasonally with storm events, land use types, a lot more to be learned from this. So a quick recap. More work is needed to better understand impacts of climate change, such as through storm events and microplastics on lake ecosystem function. And I'm a strong proponent of, regional and international collaborations are invaluable, in addition to local collaborations to better elucidate environmental patterns and processes, and just thinking about patterns at larger scales, and any derivations from those patterns are extremely important. And I like everybody else's sort of like what you can do slides. I failed to put that in my talk. I apologize. But for microplastics, one kind of a thing that is important to do, and that many organizations do, are something like a river or stream cleanup days, where you get the community together. Seafree does this a couple of times a year on different streams, such as Ashman Creek in town, where you just collect trash and plastics and whatever. And that really helps sort of not have buildup reservoirs of plastic sort of leaching over longer times. So that could help sort of reduce how many plastics are in the environment. And so, yeah, with that, thanks to many individuals for these projects. Tristan Compton, again, front and center. Again, shout out to him for his research work, and at Lake Superior State, Center for Freshwater Research and Education, and many others. And if there is time for questions, I would be happy to take questions, and also my email is here and I can put it in chat. Happy to follow up with you afterwards. And thank you all for listening in.
Thank you so much, Jon. So much information in those two stories. First, I have to say, when you said QA, QC, and data, I was like my least favorite thing to do. So God bless you for being able to do those calculations. We need people like you to do that. Super interesting. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? I will make sure that you are able to unmute yourself if you would like to ask Jon anything.
We'll also ask, and think in the essence of time, Stevie, that folks put their questions in the chat. Someone says here they missed Jon's email. I can just move that over for you. And we will start moving on with our closing remarks. Stevie?
Okay, you added that, Jon, sure. Well, we just want to thank everybody, our event supporters, Lake Superior State University, Algoma University, Waterwise, City of Sault Ste. Marie, Invasive Species Centre, the Center for Freshwater Research and Education, all of our speakers, Elizabeth, Rebecca, Kevin, and Jon, for all of your information and wisdom. I think I was head bopping to everything because I found everything so interesting. So I'm really grateful for your time and for being here to express the importance of our water and how everything's interconnected, and what we can do as a community to make a difference. So thank you so much.
And just wrapping up, a couple more comments here. This evening's presentation was just one of several initiatives that are taking place celebrating World Water Day this year. We had a presentation with some students this morning, bringing in the youth voice, and this community presentation this evening. There's also a water arts initiative where local students in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario are getting creative and raising awareness about plastic pollution. And there's also plans in the works for a shoreline cleanup. I think I stole your slide there, Steve.
That's okay.
Oops.
No, I was just going to say what Jon said about the shoreline cleanup, that we're also doing that in Sault Ste. Marie. And I know last year, both Saults did a cleanup, but we're hoping this year that information, everything that was collected, wasn't collected in the same manner on each side. So hopefully this year that can be something that is looked into, so that we can compare what's found on each side in microplastics or in all the whatever's collected garbage wise on our beaches. Sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to make a note of that to share that with Jody.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stevie. And just a few couple of comments here before we wrap up. I encourage you all to check out the Freshwater Toolkit prepared by the WaterWise Network. I have the link here, freshwaterwise.com. There's a lot of great information there about what you or your organization can do to help preserve our precious freshwater resources, some great tips and tricks as well. I also wanted to just take a moment to make a comment. If you don't know already about the City of Sault Ste. Marie's efforts regarding the Canada Water Agency, the Government of Canada is setting up a new federal agency focused on freshwater conservation and management, called the Canada Water Agency. Now, the process for selecting a new location has not been determined, but the City of Sault Ste. Marie has been working very hard to develop a competitive bid for the agency. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation at the beginning, we are located in a central part of the freshwater lakes in the world, and we have so many natural assets, cultural diversity, expertise that reaches beyond our borders, making the City of Sault Ste. Marie a great location for such an agency. So if you haven't heard about this project or initiative, I encourage you to check out www.cwassm.ca. And for everyone to make every day World Water Day. March 22nd comes once a year, but there's many things as our scientists and our champions for freshwater have said that you can do every day. And just a final comment here, local refillery, our first refillery in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Harterra, has a giveaway to encourage people to reduce the use of single-use plastics. They're giving away a water bottle. So check out their website for more details. Stevie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Just last minute, thank you to Beth Christensen, the director of the Center for Freshwater Research and Education at LSSU. She really helped organize behind the scenes, and Jody Rebeck at Algoma University and Minna for Blue More for Change. They were behind the scenes. I didn't say thank you to them in my slide, so that's my closing remark. Thank you everybody for coming and being a part of our second annual World Water Day community presentation.
Thank you, Stevie. Thank you again, everyone, for your participation. As I did mention earlier, we will be recording this event. It's been recorded and it will be posted on the Freshwater Wise website. And if you missed anything, you can go ahead and watch it at a later date. Lots of great information. And thank you, Stevie. It's been a real pleasure to partner with you on this event. We haven't met in person. You're in Ottawa. I'm here in Sault Ste. Marie, but someday we will. And I just think it speaks to, this new world, this collaboration, which are going to be so important as we move forward, not only in the COVID-19 recovery, but the fight against climate change, working together, sharing our stories and sharing our knowledge. So thank you all to our speakers. We're so grateful for your time and your stories. And I wish everyone a wonderful evening.